Second reading mentioned how wives are to be absolutely subordinate to their husbands in all things. But I'm not going to talk about that today. I have to admit I was a little worried about what I wanted to preach about in this wedding. I kept returning to my usual place of inspiration, the place I go for all my big ideas. But for some reason, every time I got on YouTube, Catholic Dad wasn't putting on anything new at that moment. So I'm going to have to wing it because my source dried up. I was thinking about the context in which this wedding is taking place. The chaos at the present moment in our country. Pandemics, the race wars, divided political spheres, conspiracies, no toilet paper, you name it, everything's affected. But it made me ask the question, what is your role as a married couple in the midst of this tumultuous time? How will God use you to redeem the present world? What came to my mind was a line from the Song of Songs. It's a book that's often quoted in every Mass. Exercitius eius contra me est amor. His army against me is love. God's army against a fallen world has always been love. And it made me realize the answer to the problems that our country faces in our times is the very thing that you two are doing right now in front of all of us. Your army against the world will be the love that you share. Because this is the way that God has always redeemed the world. What's fascinating is that immediately after the fall from the Garden of Eden, it's not as if the human race just scattered and everyone was divided and went their own way. There's actually only two lines of descendants that flow from Adam and Eve after the fall. And those two lines continue throughout all of history. The descendants of Cain and the descendants of Seth. And each manifest two primary characteristics, opposingly. Cain's descendants are described as departing from the presence of God and seeking the designs of their own hearts. And as they do this, they get stronger and stronger, and they get louder and louder. They're the doers and the makers and the movers of society. They build the big cities, construct weapons of warfare, conquer boundless lands, and make a lot of noise along the way. And then you have the descendants of Seth. And the two primary characteristics of the descendants of Seth is that they remain in the presence of God. It says they walk with God. And they seek the designs of his heart. So they remain with God and they seek his will. And because of that, they're called the sons of God. They live simple, quiet, solitary lives, and you barely even notice their footprints across the early stages of Genesis. But it was through them that God preserved his covenant with the world. And you know how he did it? They got married and they had a lot of babies. That was it. Cain's descendants grew big, strong, and loud. Seth's descendants remained small, humble, and quiet. And whilst Cain's descendants went into the world to do all this great work, many of Seth's descendants stayed at home and found other hobbies to work on, like building up the family. And within just a few generations, Cain's descendants were consumed by the flood of iniquity that they themselves had brought about in the world. And it was through the descendants of Seth that God brought forth Noah and his ark, through which he preserved all future generations. And so what is the lesson for us in our own times? His army against us is love. Let your army against a fallen world in your own times be your love. The very thing that you're about to promise to each other right now, your free, your total, and your fruitful love for one another. That's your greatest weapon. Exactly what we're witnessing at this moment. Those three promises you're going to make to one another is your war against the fallen world. To freely choose one another to begin with. Your love has already served as somewhat of a silent condemnation of the cowardice and the selfishness of our present culture by the very fact that you're getting married at such a young age. How many people have tried to dissuade you because simply it's not the norm to do what you're doing at your age? But you're not interested in following the norms of our times. Your desire is to seek the will of God. That's the only thing both of you asked me and every one of the priests that you went to. Is this the will of God that I do this? If so, forget the norms. Because the last thing we need in our times is more people following the norms of our society. Your free choice of love for one another today, at your young age, is your army against the world. A silent battle cry though it be, but one that will echo far into your future generations. They will remember what you did. Secondly, your promise of total fidelity to one another. In our age, divorce is the new norm. But you stand here today with a promise on your lips that your love will be forever. And that promise is a silent condemnation upon a culture that has forgotten the true meaning of love. To give your life unto the very end for your spouse and for your children, for good and for bad, for rich or for poor, in sickness and in health, till death do you part. Your total gift of love to one another for the rest of your lives, no matter what comes, will be your war against the world. And lastly, your promise of fertility. That will be one of your strongest weapons. Make many babies, shamelessly, imprudently, persistently. God willing, that will be your greatest army of love against this world, because evil is contraceptive by its very nature. It consumes itself and dissolves into nothing, while true love is always reproductive. True love always flows out of the two and spills over to create new life. That's the very nature of God. It's never closed in on itself, but always a gift outside of itself. Your openness to life, according to God's will for you and how many children He wants to bring into the world through your union, will be your army against the world. Because the times in which you are being espoused, they are turbulent times. They are violent times. They are chaotic times. But such are always the times of a fallen world. And the question isn't so much about the times in which we live, for that is not ours to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And today you're making your decision. You are choosing love. God's army against the fallen world has always been His love, a silent, tenacious, unrelenting, generative love. Let your army against this world be your love by the total fulfillment of the vows that you're about to take right here in front of all of us. Because this is your army against the world. And through it, God will redeem us all.